From the Fathead Studio in Speedway, Indiana, this is The Skinny.
Man, am I still pretty? And he's like, you ain't pretty, but you're going to be all right.
And now I'm just hanging on, looking at the wall, like flying this way. And I'm like, oh man, I got to let go of this thing at some point.
And then there's one that could literally pick you up.
Yeah.
It's
I'm not really sure about that, but yeah.
That's called a helicopter.
Well,
and the last lap was just chaos. I mean, like 4 wide, 5 wide.
It's like whatever. If you land it and send it into the fence, you're probably not going to get hurt. Bounce and then this insane roll. The car that Keegan was in. I mean, I don't know, it's the shape of the Beetle or what, but that thing sent it.
So I was the supercharger specialist on my old man's car with
Specialist?
Yeah, it sounds cooler than crew guy.
Hi, I'm Tony Stewart.
I'm Mario Andretti.
I'm Christy Lee.
I'm Alexander Rossi.
I'm Cruz Pedregon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Hammond, and this is The Skinny.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to The Skinny. We're here in Speedway, Indiana, coming to you from the Fatheads Eyewear Studios. I'm Ken Stout, Rico Elmore sitting right alongside. The man running the controls, formerly known as Dick Van Dyke, as the track dude is back.
Whole different episode. Whole different episode.
Can that not linger over, dude? That was hilarious,
Very
man.
good.
It was great to have Bubba the Love Sponge on here, and we're going to change things up here a bit with a championship-winning crew chief, now a award-winning broadcaster. Mr. Jeff Hammond will join us on the show here, coming from his home in North Carolina. And as you just heard there, Jeff, we had Bubba the Love Sponge on here, and he said Daniel Lasowski told him, here's what you need to know about Jeff Hammond. First of all, he will kick your ass because he goes to the gym every day, and the last thing you want to do is touch his hair. Do not touch his hair.
Oh, yeah. You got to realize, I mean, it takes about, well, we'll get into that another time, but it takes a while to get this thing put exactly in place. And the thing about Bubba the Love Sponge is I'm trying to figure this out, guys. Am I cleaning up his mess, or do I need to clean up his mess that he's sitting me up for? You know what I'm trying to say? I'm really worried about this setup deal by Bubba the Love Sponge, because
it's like
I've known him for a long time, and he can throw you a curve.
Oh, yes, he can.
It's like having Mother Teresa on after he's off of here. So you're in great shape.
Yeah, you can do no wrong after that show. We don't have to worry about breaking any of the rules. So talk to me, man. What an amazing career you have had. When, as you sit here now and you reflect back, I'm sure you've had time to do that over the course of time. Is it astonishing? I mean, starting off as a tire changer, a jack man, working your way up to a crew chief, now looking back at the drivers you were with, which a lot of that is going to be happenstance. You just end up with those guys. It's just kind of where the career led you. But looking back, the legends that you had the opportunity to work with and then succeed with, man, it's an amazing career.
I was blessed. I truly was. And again, you started talking when I was a jack man. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to the very beginning, because I firmly believe that timing is everything. And, the good Lord puts you on track. And as your life, rolls along, life's highway, it's uphills and downhills. But it actually started one summer morning when my Uncle Brad came over next door, and I was 12 years old, and said, "Hey, boy, get out of bed. You're burning daylight." Wonder where that come from. But at the same time, that was the beginning of my racing career. We go to South Carolina. We buy a 1956 Ford semi-modified to run the dirt tracks around the Carolinas, which included, at the time, Metrolina, Concord, Lancaster Speedway, Starlight Speedway down in Monroe, as well as Cherokee Speedway. So a lot of dirt tracks, a lot of legends racing around there. For a 12, going on 13-year-old kid, it was just life in the fast lane in the very beginning. As my racing career progressed, I had an opportunity to watch a lot of the legends, including, somebody like Dale Earnhardt. Dale Earnhardt's daddy, Ralph, and watching Ed Jarrett and Junior Johnson and Curtis Turner. There was a lot of race car drivers that were still racing in local dirt tracks around Charlotte for NASCAR, and having an opportunity to see all these people when I was growing up, including the fact that the first race I've ever worked was a race in which we were up Wilkesboro, and I was helping a guy named Tiger Tom Pistone, who was, he was a racer out of Chicago, moved to Charlotte, started building race cars. And my first race there with him, and I'm watching Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough and all these guys here race, and Tiny Lund was in the race. And back then, they didn't have enough cars to fill the field. So they let the Grand American cars, the 302 stuff, run against the big block Hemis and 429s that Fords had at the day. And I sit there and watch that race and help Tiger. And in the end, Richard Petty had about a 3 or 4 lap lead on the whole field, and his engine started blowing up. And lo and behold, Tiny Lund comes around, and a Camaro 55 Pepsi car, and wound up winning that race. So that was kind of like that's when the bug really bit me hard that I wanted to be around the racing. And so I turned my attention, believe it or not, to Richard Petty. Richard was the guy that I pulled for week in and week out. It was real easy to be excited about him because he won a lot.
The Skinny is brought to you by Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. And American Coach, innovation is our life force.
Welcome here to the Fatheads Eyewear Studios. This is The Skinny. We have a wonderful guest on here this week. Mr. Jeff Hammond has joined us from his home in North Carolina. Ken Stout here and Rico Elmore sitting right alongside. And we were just talking about some of the big names that you grew up with at the time. And, of course, as you know, Rico, that was the same thing going on here in the Midwest.
Yeah, it was. And, we had everybody, from A.J. Foyt, Mario Andretti, and the list goes on. And current day, current or a little more current, Tony Stewart, Kenny Schrader, moving on into, nowadays Kyle Larson. And, Jeff, one of the things I was thinking when you were sitting there talking about all the stars that, you watched growing up and, that probably ran a lot of both, I have to think that helped attendance. What is your thought? And I think the same thing with IndyCar.
No, I agree. I mean, superstars were, I don't say abundant, but there were a lot of people who were recognizable, even though we didn't have social media like we do today or television to really understand these guys. If they wound up being on ABC's Wide World Sports, that was, a pretty big deal, especially if you got interviewed. So, yeah, I think that the key to all this was word of mouth. And the big thing about when I say word of mouth are these drivers, especially the NASCAR drivers of the early days, they were accessible to the fans. I mean, you were going to see them at the local gas stations. You were going to see them at the local restaurants. You got to remember at one time, a lot of times stock car racers in this day, I mean, they either towed the car there or even drove it to the racetrack in the very beginning. But even as it progressed, they were just accessible. I mean, after a race, the track, no matter where you were at, whether you were Martinsville or Bristol or Charlotte, they opened up the front grandstand gate and allowed the people to go across and look around and see what was going on. I know in the mid-'60s, the big crash at Charlotte that eventually claimed Fireball Roberts' life whenever Ned Jarrett and Junior Johnson crashed coming off of turn 2 and subsequently had a huge fireball. And, Roberts got caught in his car and Ned Jarrett pulled him out, but he wound up dying from pneumonia from his burns. After that race, I was sitting on the back straightaway in my dad and my uncle's dump truck. We had built a platform on the back of a dump truck at Charlotte. We were sitting there, and that was my first big time race that I got a chance to go and see in person. And my grandfather, my Uncle Brad, he literally had an 8mm camera, and he actually had footage of the crash between those 3 drivers and the subsequent fireball and the aftermath of it. We went down in the garage area, and that's what was so unbelievable. We actually had a friend of ours, a neighbor, who worked for Holman Moody, and he worked on the weekends. He was a really good mechanic, but he worked like a construction job during the week. But he'd go to the racetrack on the weekend with a crew from Holman Moody. And we were, down in the garage area with him, and he was showing us some of the cars, especially what was left in Ned's car and Fireball's car. Back then, NASCAR wasn't really trying to hide anything, they didn't feel like it was necessary to keep the fans away from it. So it was pretty much an open opportunity to walk up and say hello to Richard Petty, say hello to David Pearson. So I think that's where a lot of the popularity began. And the reason why the king is the king is that man, honestly, until to today, he's never, ever wavered on stopping and signing an autograph or taking a picture.
Jeff, who was your idol growing up? A young man, and you were there when all the greats were greats and the next generation of greats were coming up. Who was your idol as a child?
At the time, believe it or not, it was Fireball Roberts. I mean, I love that color of that car. When we did our first dirt car, we didn't get that pale purple. We had a dark metallic, it was called plum crazy metallic purple that we had on our race car. But I wanted the number 22 on our car. We couldn't get that. So my football number was 32. So that was close enough. So Dad agreed. We, numbered our car 32, but it was Fireball Roberts. And, I was just, basically devastated for a long time because I'd witnessed the crash and, realized that, the outcome as far as Fireball was concerned, we lost him. And so I turned my attention, believe it or not, to Richard Petty. Richard was the guy that I pulled for week in and week out. And it was real easy to be excited about him because he won a lot. Making and running moonshine. I mean, Junior didn't make a lot of moonshine, but he sure enough delivered a lot of it.
Welcome back to The Skinny. We have Mr. Jeff Hammond on the show with us, coming to us remotely from his home in North Carolina. So much history all along the way. His career's been exceptional. Now, of course, we're used to seeing him in the broadcast booth, but talking to him about his early days. And Jeff, I'm curious, when you said you got the bug, you kind of told us about that story watching the races, but when did you figure out that you wanted to actually get your hands dirty, get in there, work with one of the teams? And by the way, you start off with a pretty cool guy as well. It was, I think, 1971 NASCAR Rookie of the Year that you ended up joining with Walter Ballard a couple of years later. So pretty cool. I don't know if that was the beginning of your career or not, but curious how that all came about.
Well, it was kind of like an accident happening, a little bit like the Petty Blue color to a certain degree. I was always looking for somebody to help, especially once we quit racing dirt ourselves. Dad and I agreed that it was kind of costly and time consuming. He wanted to play golf, and I was honestly, at that period in my lifetime, I was chasing a football dream in high school as well as early part of my college career. But I still had that bug of wanting to be involved in racing. So I'd go out and ask, different people, whether it was Elmore Langley or Frank Warren, Jim Vandiver. I was, like I say, there were so many guys that I would just holler at them, say, hey, you need some help this weekend to track? Yeah, come on, we'll pay you pit pack. And that was it. That's all you'd get. You'd get money to get in on. And back then, I think pit passes were either $5 or $7 to get in, as long as you had a team that would let you sign in on their car. So I would go out and do that. And I was getting offers. And my dad kept saying, no, you need to wait. You don't need to take this deal. You need to take that deal. Just keep waiting. So Walter came along, and he was still okay with the idea of me, just the weekends. He didn't need a full-time guy. But I was putting more hours in at his place just about than I was on my construction job with my dad. But Walter was a great guy to work with because he built his own engines. And the best thing about it, it gave me a connection and gave me an understanding about Junior Johnson Associates. At that time, we bought a lot of engine parts from up at Junior's place in Rhonda, North Carolina. And I'd go up there and pick up parts. And if I didn't do it, Walter's wife, Katie, was doing it. But in the process, we wound up I got to be good friends with Herb Nabb, who was crew chief for Junior, and at that time, Cale Yarborough. And that's really where, a year or so down the road, the big break came for me. And that was when basically they needed some help at Juniors. A guy had left, and Herb came to me in the fall race at Darlington and said, hey, would you be interested in doing a job interview with us? And up to that point, my dad kept pushing me off. Don't take something with a team you can't, be competitive with and have fun with and be took care of. But when I went home from Darlington that night and woke him up, he was already in bed getting ready for the next day's work on the construction job. I told him the deal, and he said, okay. That was it. That was the only thing my dad said that night. Was just, he didn't question me any other way. He said, okay, don't be late. That was it. So
awesome.
Good choice, and it all worked out for the best, I guess.
Oh man, no question. And yeah, as we fast forward to 1982, you become a crew chief, and you're working with Cale Yarborough. And what was it like as you look at crew chiefs today in comparison to you taking that job, stepping up, becoming a crew chief? What did that mean? How did your job duties change? Were you responsible for strategy and stuff like that during a race?
Yeah, that was part of what we did. But the good thing about what I did and when it happened, I'd been on that crew, for about 4.5 years, and working around Junior and all the rest of the guys. So when Tim Brewer left in '81, I knew we needed a crew chief, and I guess it was my ego to a certain degree. I felt like I could do the job. So I walked in the office, knocked on the door, and said, Junior, I want to try to be your crew chief. And at that time, I had a dirt car of my own. I was running sometimes on weekends when we had off. And he looked at me and said, well, boy, if you're going to be my crew chief, you got to get rid of that race car. I can't have you working on your stuff and my stuff at the same time and you not being 100%. I told him, I said, I'll get rid of it today. So that gave me the shot, and Junior was such a great mentor. And the interesting thing about Junior, and we always laugh about it, everybody who's ever worked up there, we laugh about the fact that we worked at Junior Johnson and Associates. We called him the professor, and the reason for that was we thought he was the guy that was at the University of Rhonda of Ingle Hollow. That's exactly where the shop's, physical location was Ingle Hollow, North Carolina. But Junior was the professor, and he gave you lessons in not only racing, but in animal husbandry, farming, you name it. He gave you a lot of lessons. And if you listened, and even when he wasn't talking, if you watched how Junior carried himself and his actions, you could learn a whole lot. He was probably one of the smartest men I've ever known to not ever have even complete a high school education.
Wow. Super cool.
Yeah, I kind of wondered that it was with his education, but I mean, what an unbelievable figure in the sport, and I think we're missing a little bit of that today.
So looking back at that time, was he as big a personality at the time as we look back at him now, or was all that still building?
A lot of it was still building because, again, Junior was well known within our part of the world, our NASCAR part of the world. But I think the rest of the world started to find Junior Johnson because of the movie The Last American Hero, and the book and the story that Thomas Wolfe wrote about him, that Jeff Bridges, portrayed a young Junior Jackson, and that's what they called him in the movie. But a lot of footage shot in and around the shop, around the local short tracks, gave him a different look on his upbringing, the business that he was in, and a little glimpse of the inside of what the real world was for Junior, which was, making and running moonshine. I mean, Junior didn't make a lot of moonshine, but he sure enough delivered a lot of it. Behind him looked like he was getting ready to jump on him. He spun around and hit him with it. And they didn't get him for the moonshine deal, but they got him for an assault on a federal officer.
Welcome back to the Skinny. Great to have Jeff Hammond with us here on the show, coming to us remotely. Love the North Wilkesboro Speedway shirt, by the way, my friend.
I'm wearing that for a reason, because the fact that that's where my career really got its first start. And this past, May, we were able to go back there and resurrect that track and do a lot of cool things. And you can see here, if you can, the patch that's got the All-Star event on there, which just so happened working for Junior Johnson, we won the first All-Star event at Charlotte in 1985. So a very special shirt for me, and the fine folks at Charlotte Motor Speedway and SMI, who also own North Wilkesboro, gave me this shirt to wear the day of the race, and I'm really proud of it.
It's super cool. And you just said Junior Johnson. I was thinking about it in the last segment. We keep talking about Junior. Well, everybody might be thinking about Dale Jr. because everybody calls him Junior now, but you've been referring to Junior Johnson the entire time. Of course, legendary team owner, and pretty cool that you had that tenure with him. You touched on the fact that he didn't make a lot of moonshine, but he's run a lot of moonshine. And I was going to ask you before, and I should have whenever you were talking about earlier in your career, but how much of that, we hear that depicted, right? I mean, a lot of moonshine runners, but we're talking about in the 80s now that you're crew chiefing for him. How much of that did you see growing up as a youngster? Were they still doing that at the time?
Okay, let's make sure we understand something here. At that time when I joined Junior had definitely walked away from the moonshine business. But there were still associates of his, friends of his, that still made moonshine, and they still do today. And a lot of them that are involved in making moonshine is now been legalized, and they do it within the confines of the government regulations. But as far as Junior is concerned, once he got out of prison, which a lot of people may or may not have known that he did serve time, he was never, like I say, he never got caught driving, but he got caught one morning. His dad had sent him up to the still to stoke the fire so they could get ready to run off a batch of liquor that during the course of the day. And the revenuers were waiting on him. And again, back in that period of time, they had to literally grab you. If you could outrun them on foot or in car, they couldn't arrest you. Just because they saw you, they couldn't. That was just the way the law was written. They literally had to handcuff you and bring you in. And that's how they wound up catching him, was the fact that he was at the still. He ran from them. He got away from them, but they went back and arrested him. And this is what they really got him for, more so than any kind of moonshine deal. But it was assaulting a federal officer, a revenuer, because the guy was getting ready to jump on his back. And like I said, Junior was stoking the fire, and he had a shovel, flat-bladed shovel in his hand. And when he saw the guy behind him, looked like he was getting ready to jump on him, he spun around and hit him with it. And they didn't get him for the moonshining deal, but they got him for an assault on the federal officer. Dick Beatty comes down there and said, "Guys, can't let you run this car."
Oh.
What?
The Skinny is brought to you by American Coach. American Coach, innovation is our life force. And Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04.
Welcome to the V-Desk here. Ken Stout and Rico Elmore sitting behind the desk, having a great show with one of the absolute best, and Mr. Jeff Hammond coming to us remotely, the track dude back there running the controls. So, Jeff, you're working for Junior Johnson, a big personality, as you just mentioned before, one of the smartest gentlemen you've ever worked with, and people like Cale Yarborough on the team. And, of course, I'm not familiar with him, but certainly watching the way he raced, didn't take much to get that hair trigger up and going. But what was it like to have those big A personalities in the same room together?
It was fun. I mean, because there were so many A personalities at that period of time, believe it or not, when you're hanging out, again, young guy, I guess you say maturing into that world of NASCAR, which had, been started back in, the late 40s. But you're hanging around, working for Junior, Herb Knapp, Jake Elder, G.C. Spencer, Charlie Glotzback, Cale Yarborough, David Pearson. You start going down, Richard Petty. These guys were men among men. I mean, really, they were. I mean, they were definitely the heroes of the time. But the personalities and the way that we interacted with one another was fun. I mean, it was a deal where we get done with a day's hard work, we'd run, get a shower, go get something to eat, and then we'd come back and somebody, especially if they had the opportunity, like a Junior Johnson or somebody, could get a suite or big bedroom. They start playing cards together. I mean, a lot of really interesting and fun nights playing 7 card or what I'm saying, just playing poker and having fun. I mean, everybody really enjoyed each other. Good camaraderie and conversation. And a lot of times when I'm talking about this, it's not a matter of talking about shop as much talking about life in general. I mean, when you think about Bud Moore, this man landed, on the beach of Normandy on D-Day and went through World War II. He would talk about it sometimes, and other times he wouldn't. But he, again, was one of those masterminds in the same vein as Junior Johnson. Smokey Unick, even though he didn't live this close, you had an opportunity to interact with him because of Junior knew Smokey and had a great relationship with Ray Fox. And Smokey and Ray, they came from Daytona Beach. So, we would interact with these people. And I don't know. Like I said, I was blessed and the timing was right as far as my life was concerned to be offered up this opportunity. And, I feel so special because a lot of these guys are now gone, but memories I got for them and the things that they taught me and the fun that I had with them, it'll live on forever.
Jeff, is there one moment that you can recall where you realized you were now part of that inner circle?
That's a really good question. I think if we had a defining moment on where I found myself, and I felt like maybe I had, maybe accomplished what you're asking me. Because up to that point, I mean, it was just me doing a job. I really wasn't trying to be a philosopher and trying to figure out, what is life really giving me. But since you ask it that way, it may have happened in 1985. And that year was so unbelievable. And I think, creating and defining who my character really needed to be in my role, because that was the year Bill Elliott won, everything in a brother, including being, $1 million bill. But we went on and won the championship. But the defining moment I'm referring to would have been they had the All-Star event, and it was going to be run on a Saturday afternoon prior to the Coca-Cola 600 on Sunday. We started building a car especially for that. Junior had a really tight relationship with R.J. Reynolds. He wanted to win that so bad he could taste it. And we went all out trying to build the best race car that we could ever build. And from the time we went to Banjo Matthews to pick up that car to the multitude of tests that we went down to Charlotte Motor Speedway and prepared it, working with Chevrolet in the wind tunnel, it probably at that point in time, it was the finest race car that ever come out of Eagle Hollow. We went out that day. We wound up winning that race on the last lap against Harry Gant. Engine blew up. Race was over with. We were celebrating. And Darrell looked at Junior and said, "Junior, I sure would like to race that car tomorrow." Now, mind you, we had qualified our 600 car and had qualified fourth in the other car. But this one, I mean, like I said, it was special. So we go in the NASCAR hauler. We say, "Dick Beatty, can we do this?" And Junior asked us, "Dick, can we withdraw the number 11 in Sunday's race, take this car, swap the engines, and put the same engine that we've already got in the other car back in this one, and start at the back of the field?" And Dick says, "Yeah, I think you can do that." So we went to work doing that, cleaning the first one up, taking the engine out of the other car, worked on it that afternoon till I don't know, dark, Came back in crack of dawn. We're putting it together, and you got to understand, back in those days, we started the race for the 600 at 12:30 on Sunday, and I think it was around 7:35, quarter to 8. Dick Beatty comes down there and said, "Guys, can't let you run this car."
Oh,
What? I mean, you got to be kidding us. You can't do that. Oh, man. You talking about Junior Johnson having to come apart? He said, "You lied to me, Dick." He said, "I asked you, and you told me we could. We would have never done it." You know, like we went through all the argument. But he said, "Well, Daytona Beach called and said you couldn't do it." So what had happened, Billy France Jr., I think, had talked to some other officials, and they called Dick and said, "They can't do it. You know, it's not in our rule book. We're not going to start this kind of stuff." So here we are, just hours away from the start of the Coca-Cola 600, and we got one car tore all the way apart, and the other car halfway together type deal. You know, it was really like, oh, my God. So Darrell and I grabbed Junior and get him off the corner. Junior, I said, "You're going to have to calm down. We're running for points. When you're this, you know, we'll put it back together. We'll be fine. We'll go out and kick their butts." I'm telling you right now, I'm ready to load this stuff up. This is BS. I said, "Just let us do let's do it." I finally calmed him down enough, and we went to work. We're going along through there, and Junior's helping, and we're getting real close. But we literally were rolling that car out on the starting grid as they said, "Gentlemen, start your engines."
oh,
That's how close we came to not starting that Coca-Cola 600. But at the end of the day, we kicked their butts and we won the 600. So we won
Wow.
Saturday and we won on Sunday. And on Monday morning, back in that time, Good Morning America, it was a big program on local news and everything, or nationwide news. Well, that particular Monday morning, we're sitting on the start finish line with those two cars and Darrell Waltrip, while at Indy they had Danny Sullivan, because that was the year he did the spin and win.
mm-hmm.
But where I'm going with this whole deal, and to answer your question, Mike, is that at the end of all of this, on Tuesday, Junior came by me and he stopped and he put his hands on his shoulders. The only time he's ever done this, and since I've been around him and known him, he said, "You did a good job, man. You did a good job." So I felt like I made Daddy happy. You know what I'm saying? It was one of those kind of moments.
Yeah, wow, man, a little emotional there for you as well. That's
Well, it's one of those things that, you know, you just never forget. And he was so great to me. I just, like I say, it's one of those kind of people, a lot like my father. I miss him very much because both of them, you know, influence you as far as life and the way your life is turning out, that, you know, you just can't ever get over the fact of moments that, excuse me, that mean a lot. And that one meant a lot. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you some of the things that he probably called me and said to me on the radio.
We're here with Jeff Hammond. Welcome back to the Skinny. Some great stories coming out of this guy, as you might imagine, serving with Junior Johnson, to mention some of the other incredible teams along the way in his massively successful career. 3 championships in there, and Cale Yarborough, one of the drivers. But you and Darrell Waltrip really ended up being the team, and many argued, certainly at the time, the most successful driver crew chief team, as you went out and just absolutely had some incredible years. And, of course, we know Darrell now in the broadcast booth, much like yourself, a big personality, loaded with a lot of humor. Was it that way? Was he that way when he was in the car, or was there a different Darrell? Because we see him now, the pressure gets off, you know, and the guys relax and they have a lot of fun. But when they're in the heat of the battle, much like a Tony Stewart, you would say, man, those personalities are completely different when they're in competitive mode.
You know, it was a good thing about our period. We didn't have a lot of people that could listen in on our conversations, because one of the reasons why, you know, Darrell is a very intense race car driver. He's a very smart race car driver. and to make sure I share this with you, is that people ask me a lot of times, say, well, what's the difference between Cale Yarborough and Darrell Waltrip? I said, it's the difference between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. Cale is Joe Frazier. I mean, he's just a battler. I mean, he's the kind of guy, he's going to wear you out. His favorite scene back in the early days when I was first hanging around with him, to no matter if it was Herb Nabb or with Travis Carter and Tim Brewer and Jr., he'd say, guys, just get it close. I'll make up the difference. In Darrell's case, he would make you work your butt off trying to find the best feel for that race car, because in his mind, I want the car to do the work until I need to help the car get the job done. He'd be the one who'd want to put the car on his back late in the race, but he wanted that car to help him as much as possible. And it was a good way, and it was a good learning curve as far as that's concerned. But going back to Darrell, Cale was very, very quiet on the radio, while Darrell was anything but. And when you're having a good day, he still talked a lot. He still wanted a lot of information. But when you're having a bad day, oh my gosh, I can't tell you some of the things that he probably called me and said to me on the radio, because I think it still would be against the law today. But, you know, people say, I can't believe you let him talk to you like that. That's my job. I mean, my job is to take all the crap. My job is to be that co-pilot, because we didn't have spotters back then. It was just really me and him. You know, occasionally when Junior was around, you know, Junior would say something, and he and Junior got into it a couple of times. And there again, my job was to be the referee and, you know, keep harmony within the family as much as possible so we could do our jobs. And when we did our jobs right, you know, the records speak for themselves. But many a time on Mondays, it was kind of like, you know, if I took it personal, I guess Darrell and I would have fought a lot. I mean, physically would have fought a lot. But I understood my job is to deal with this. And our favorite saying was always, whatever is said on Sunday is forgot on Monday. And that's how we worked.
Could you have taken him?
One hand behind my back. Guys, I'm going to tell you something right now, and Darrell knew this. I don't fight fair. So you
fight
know,
to win.
Fight
to win.
That's right.
So speaking of fighting, 79 Daytona 500, when the Allisons decided they were going to gang up on Cale Yarborough, what was your recollection of that day?
Wait a minute. I thought we weren't going to talk about fighting. I thought it was all about brotherly love. I'm just kidding. No, here again, lesson in life, Michael. An incredible day. And again, you know, a lot of people don't understand the backstory of this whole deal of why the Allisons were really fighting with each other. I mean, fighting with Cale at Daytona. But part of it, what happened at Daytona was they had a lot of rain early in the morning. And, you know, NASCAR and all the people had the big TV race going on. So probably the apron area and pit road and some other places, there's still a lot of water, definitely a lot of water in the infield. And early in the race, Donnie and Bobby got together, and we got caught up in it and spun down into the mud, and we actually lost a bunch of laps. Finally got out of the mud, came around, cleaned the car up, kept working on it, had a really fast race car. They mean very fast. And Donnie was good. But every time the caution would come out, we'd get behind him, and back in those days, you didn't get to wave around. You had to pass the driver before he got back to start-finish line to take the caution flag. So we'd done it 3 times. We'd beat him that way, pass him down the back straightaway, get our lap back. So late in the race, when all this came down and those two finally, you know, Donnie was said, he ain't passing me again. And he went down there to block. You saw the crash. You saw the argument. The fight didn't start until Bobby came over. Now, he was coming over to check on Donnie, but Cale was still mad at him for wrecking everybody at the first part of the race. And so they mouthed off at each other, and Bobby said something to Cale, and Cale, you know, popped him inside the car. Well, Bobby had a bloody nose. Bobby will tell you, I've got to fix this right now. I can't let him walk away with, you know, getting by with that. That's when they got out, and that's when the fight started. and you asked me what my role was, what was going on, you got to realize didn't have TV monitors in the pits at that time. We were listening to the PA call from down in the garage area when they didn't come around, and we realized we're tore up sitting on the back straightaway or wherever it is. We're listening to what the PA announcer is calling, which is the best he could see through his binoculars, and saying that they were rolling around on the ground and they're doing this and doing that. Well, a couple of the guys, Henry Benfield, one of our gas man, he took off running down toward turn 4. And from my short track days, back in the Carolinas, I think, okay, we're going to go get in a fight. Let's go. Well, I turned to take off running, and something said, time out. What is Junior doing? Life lesson coming here. I looked back at him, and he was just taking the headsets off and putting them inside the radio box. I went over to him and said, what do I need to do here? I mean, because I was confused. I mean, what should we be doing here? Because I remember I'm a crew member. I'm not the guy in charge at that period in 1979. And he said, better get the damn truck ready to load that piece up on it. He was so disgusted, but he was not saying, go get them, guy. You know what I'm saying? So I started cleaning up the pits. Everybody else finally came back, did the same thing. And to this day, I mean, we never had any animosity toward the one crew or the 15 crew at that point in time. It was not anything between us. It was all let the drivers settle it. Still love Donnie Allison. Congratulations him becoming a Hall of Famer. Bobby Allison, Hall of Famer. It was just one of those things that happened on the racetrack. But there's a time and a place to get involved in something, and you always want the guy who's paying the check to tell you to get involved. And that's something that I tried to carry on from that point on, because when you lose the biggest race of the year and you're that calm and I guess you might say that direct about it, you learn that there are going to be days like that, and you just got to make the best of them.
Want to get the skinny on other guests and different types of motorsports? Check out our YouTube page and get the skinny. The Skinny is brought to you by Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. And American Coach. American Coach, innovation is our life force.
Welcome back once again to The Skinny. We have Jeff Hammond on the show with us here today, coming to us remotely from his home in North Carolina with some incredible stories of the history of this sport. And we've really been talking a lot about your tenure there at Junior Johnson's team. And I know you wanted to close this segment out with a little bit of information about Junior Johnson and that time there. I do want to let the fans know, hey, we have Jeff Hammond on here. When you have somebody at this level of guests, we're going to extend this one. There will be a part 2 to this show that you'll be able to catch next week as well, right here on The Skinny. So with that said, fill us in some more.
Well, I told you, Junior was great at life lessons, racing lessons, everything about it. You can learn so much from him. And Daryl and I definitely learned a lot from him. And I remember when Daryl made a comment the other day, and I had forgotten about it. But I want to share this with you. And it's just coming from Daryl Waltrip. But this is a saying that he and I heard from Junior Johnson several times throughout our time being there. I'm going to quote Daryl. I can hear Junior Johnson saying, you have to play with emotion, but you can't let your emotions play with you. And I think that is so profound that's the one thing about Junior Johnson through the entire time. He had moments that he'd get excited, but he probably was one of the most level-headed, non-emotional people that you've ever been around. But he knew you needed that emotion to be your best, but you could not let that emotion, just mess with your head. And so I think that the professor, like I say, was giving some good wisdom to all those who would listen. And I still think it rings true today.
It's so funny that you say that. I remember having this conversation with my son early on, and I would try to tell him as he was learning to race, you've got to leave emotion out of the game. Of course, it's absolutely impossible to do, but the message inherently was I was trying to relay that same type of message. Use it when it's helpful, but don't let it get you in trouble and cost you a race, possibly your career. So words of wisdom from one of the absolute best. Hey, man, thanks a lot for taking the time here. I know you're going to stick around with us. We'll get another show out of you that our fans will be able to watch next week. Hope you enjoyed this version. We just scratched the surface with one of the absolute best here in Jeff Hammond. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen.